Hi, and welcome to another episode of the 2022 Philanthropy and Social Justice series. I'm Urvi Shriram, and I lead the Center of Philanthropy for Social Justice at the Indian School of Development Management. These conversations are really helping us demystify the often unwieldy conceptualization of philanthropy for social justice and really understand what it means in practice. We at the Center aim to advance and enrich dialogues that help build a narrative of philanthropy, which is not just limited to the feel-good impulse of giving back to the society, but one that is strongly rooted in furthering human rights, social justice, and in bringing about broader systemic shifts that are needed in the sector today. We're really thrilled to have with us Mr. Amit Chandra, who's widely admired and respected for his incredible hands-on approach in philanthropy. He's been involved with Bain Capital. He's been trustee of the Tata Trust, founder and board member of Ashoka University, board member of Give India, and many other foundations. He was also on Asia's Heroes of Philanthropy list by Forbes in 2016, along with his wife Archana. Thanks, Amit. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Urvi. Thank you for that generous invitation to be here.
Just, Amit, want to begin with, asking you, what is your vision of success as a philanthropist, and how is your philanthropy working to truly address the issues that you care about the most? And would love to hear any examples of, what has worked well and also what has not worked.
Well, really a lot of questions in that question. I think we are, we are very impatient with what we do, and I think we are constantly evolving, and with that the bar keeps changing. So I think we never feel satisfied, with the current status. I think, and therefore I think, and that creative sense of impatience and lack of satisfaction in some ways, but just given how much there is to do, keeps propelling us forward to keep evolving and try to do things both differently and do more. So I think while we always have had targets, I think the targets are always moving, and that's been a part of our journey, I would say, over the last 20 years. I think it's very important. If we would have stuck to our targets, that we had set for ourselves and we started this journey, I think we would have really sold ourselves short. So I would like to begin with that. Our vision, in line with what I just said, has also changed. It's changed as we have had both failures and successes. I would say personally, I'm not a visionary. I'm much more a person who kind of learns by doing things and seeing what works, observing what's working for others, and importantly, what's also not working. And also, I think experiencing both joy and importantly sorrow. So, being out in the field, I spend a lot of time in the field, and I think a lot of that shapes what we do and how we do it. And so the choices, be it verticals or be it approaches to how we do things, have changed based on our experiences and our observations and our learnings. And to bring that alive, I would say, for in terms of vertical choices, we were very focused, very broadly at one point of time, and then I think my wife Archana is, I think, much more wiser than me, and told me that what I do on boards of companies is something I should practice in the social sector, which is focus. And so we decided to, over time, get a lot more focused. I also realized that given we were spending a lot of time in the sector and had, I think, were amongst maybe a handful who were, going much deeper, that it was important for us to focus on more underserved areas. So both we made choices, whether it be verticals or horizontals, to focus on things that other people were not focused on. As a consequence of which, we started over the years focusing less on education and health, even though they were verticals of great passion for us. And we started focusing a lot more on rural development, for example. Archana, of course, focuses all her time on mental disabilities. Also, in terms of horizontal choices, we realized, and this came a lot from Archana's experience running a organization, and my observations serving on the boards of some organizations, that there was a deep lack of emphasis on capacity building in the social sector. While the expectations were very high, there was a big disconnect between investing for growth and expectation and those expectations. And so we, over the years, started focusing a lot, and I would say we are amongst maybe the largest or 2 or 3 largest players over the years who have focused on capacity building for the whole philanthropic ecosystem. So choices in terms of both verticals and horizontals have been an evolution for us. Even the way we spend our time, very importantly, and our money, a lot of things, I think things that we used to do early on in our journey is very different from how we do it now, and it comes from many of the mistakes we made and that we've seen other people make. And I'm sure we'll continue to make mistakes as we go along and keep changing our approach.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing this with us, Amit. I think one of the limitations we're facing as researchers, on philanthropy is that there's very little documentation of knowledge, learning journeys, motivation, success stories. So I think building that is definitely one of, our objectives at the center. But, moving on.
Yeah, maybe Urvi, I'll pause you there. And that's a very important point you make. And we realize, because we don't come from a family where there's extraordinary amount of wealth. We spend as we earn. And we realize if we have to really make impact, which is beyond our capability, that we have to invest in what you just talked about, which is making sure that learnings in the sector are, first of all, being captured, second, being documented, third, being disseminated, and fourth, being assimilated and absorbed. And so a big part of what we have been trying to do over the last few years is actually exactly that process.
Right.
And so in our capacity building efforts, we spend a lot, whether it be investing in institutions that are trying to do that. IDR being an example, or a digital platform that now I think everyone in the social sector respects enormously. Or it be movements. Pay What It Takes is a great example of a movement which is trying to do that. Or it be other capturing of practices which lends to building toolkits. We worked with Satwa, for example, to figure out how matching donations done by donors and offered by organizations can have outsized impact on organizations. And so Satwa did a study across donors and across organizations, which led to this online toolkit being available now in the sector. We believe there's so much good work done by lots of NGOs and lots of donors.
Yeah.
And we need researchers to go study these practices. In some cases, it's good practices. In some cases, it's failures. And actually go out and then go through that cycle, which is study, document, disseminate, and convene so that people can actually go out and learn from these and, either have, outsized impact on their own work, at least, or avoid making the same mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And, initially, I think there's been a tradition of apprehension about, talking about how much money you're giving, what you're giving to, and all of that. But now, thankfully, I think one is seeing this trend of, if you're talking about what you're doing is only helping to encourage others in, following suit or not making this mistakes, as you said. So that's definitely, what we want to do as well at the center. Globally, the list of inequality stats that one keeps hearing about and discussing is super long. And broadly, they all really point to how unequally distributed is the chance to, live a healthy, long life, even in modest prosperity. And the people who've been historically pushed to the margins of their societies face the brunt of those inequalities even more, whether it's the migrants or people with certain disabilities, people of certain caste, tribes, etc. They are facing not just one inequality, but a whole range of intersecting inequalities, which probably requires a different level of commitment from them and ambition of philanthropic actors to, contribute. But we keep seeing that funding priorities hardly ever take these multiple inequalities and the deeply entrenched issues into account. Focus, as you said, tends to be in a select few areas, mostly on single issue programs and service delivery, leaving these complex sort of issues with less funds and attention. So how do you think Indian philanthropy can shift from this traditional mindset and practices to philanthropy that really puts justice at its core? Philanthropy that not only addresses the symptoms of social issues, but also tries to fix the root causes that give rise to those issues in the first place.
Yeah. So I think it's it's a very important question, and I believe that while philanthropy has some role to play in this, I don't think philanthropy is the only answer to it. But that does not mean philanthropy should not focus on the issue of inequalities. I do believe in this, my personal view, but I don't go around saying that and my wife and I both believe in this, that just because we may choose to have our philosophy, that it should be the philosophy that even our friends should follow. I think it's really to each their own. Our view is that the wealth that we are blessed with, arises a lot because of the society that nurtures us and creates that wealth. And having, a little bit beyond, what is really needed to lead a certain kind of a lifestyle is, somewhat unnecessary and causes diminishing returns, and is a responsibility of us to then use it in a way in which we can impact as many lives as possible. Okay. Now, as philanthropists, we believe that the best way to do that is to do two things. One is to play in spaces where the government does not play, because the government cannot reach everyone through its social programs. So there are lots of gaps that exist, and I think someone has to fulfill those gaps. Because as you rightly pointed out, there are inequalities, and the inequalities mean that lots of people get left behind. And if you just simply say trickle-down economics will take care of them, it will not. So I think that is one role of philanthropy. I think there's another role of philanthropy, which is where we are very active, which is to show at the end of the day what's a better mousetrap for social spending, and work collaboratively with the government to actually improve the quality and the delivery of social spending. Now, whatever we do as philanthropists will be massively dwarfed by public spending, massively dwarfed. And government will always, over the next coming centuries, dwarf philanthropy. But the government cannot do a lot of things. It cannot take risk. It cannot be entrepreneurial. It cannot, do certain things in its programs. I personally believe that it's the responsibility of philanthropists to come in and play in those areas, and then to improve the quality of social spending, be it education, health, or any other area, and forge partnerships with the government, as opposed to really doing exactly what the government is doing. Okay, there's no point of going out and trying to run a school exactly the way the government will run a school. But it's important to develop a tool that, the risk of failure of which is high, but if the success of which is great, can be actually transferred into government schools, and they partner with the government on making sure that tool is transferred into the government. Do the same thing in health, etc. So I personally feel that is the role of philanthropy. It's to take high risks and to ensure that there's success, and to have, partnerships. And the part of the problem is there's such deep fragmentation. Everyone wants to run their own NGO. Every philanthropist wants to run their own initiative. So we don't work in a collaborative manner to, forge partnerships and address issues which are far bigger than the business issues that we address. Far, far bigger, more sticky, more difficult. And so we trivialize these problems. But if we get together and try to solve these problems and make sure that the government is well equipped to handle them, then I think we will actually see social change. So in my view, those are the two responsibilities. And then, of course, the third issue in all of this, going back to your question, is, of course, how much capital, and both human and financial, are we going to put to work to address some of these issues? Mm-hmm. And no doubt about it, if we have huge expectations from the government to address all these problems, and these problems are not being addressed, right? The amount of wealth in the world that exists is staggering. And it's not being used, right? It's just basically lying there. And we know in most of these cases, even if that wealth is squandered, 3 generations won't be able to use it. And so the question is, how can some of that wealth be used productively to solve issues that are relevant during our lifetime? Now, before this planet, issues in this planet become irreversible in some cases, whether it's in climate or in many other cases, right? So I think that, again, is a separate issue, which is how to bring urgency to addressing issues which we are seeing every day around us, but are doing nothing about, while we are still very focused on simply wealth creation. So I think that's a separate issue, which needs some degree of urgency, including, by the way, amongst philanthropists, people who have committed to giving large sums of money. That money, while it's actually parked, is earning far more wealth than is actually being spent. Yeah. So I think we need to figure out ways how to create capacity to solve problems at a much more urgent rate.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about wealth creation and wealth generation, we're seeing that there's a massive intergenerational wealth transfer that's happening everywhere, but more so in India. And that will probably lead to significant increases in family. And many of the younger generation, families will become the face of their philanthropy. And probably these people have different education, different approaches, different experiences. So do you think they can play a catalytic role through their philanthropy in fundamentally improving the structures, the institutions, and the systems in our country? And what would be, your advice to these first-time givers?
Yeah, Urvi, if you spend time in the social sector, you either become cynical or you become an optimist. It's bubble shaped. So I'm an optimist. I'm not a cynic, and I do land up interacting a lot with youngsters. I do see a lot more hope in the young generation than in my generation. My generation has, in many ways, had this huge quest for extraordinary wealth creation through mechanisms in which we've probably screwed up the planet in a irreversible way, but I see a lot more interest in the next two generations actually, in trying to be responsible. But we have to actually see evidence of that play out when actually that wealth comes into their hand. Because it will be, in many cases, it will essentially be inherited wealth. Yeah. So we'll have to see how that really manifests itself. It's still early days. What we are seeing, which again is an encouraging trend, and I really, really like it, is first generation wealth creators And this, I think, started a little bit with the IT wealth creation in the country. And now is actually spiking further up with the, what's happened with the VC funded wealth creation. That class of wealth creators are far more thoughtful with what they want to do with their wealth, far more generous with what they want to do with their wealth. And that tells you that there's this category of people who are first generation wealth creators from knowledge enterprises, from entrepreneurship, who are very different from, the inheritors and think differently about society. And there's clearly hope because India is becoming a more entrepreneurial society. And that, I think, is very, very encouraging.
And we're also seeing that the role of philanthropy and the power that it holds is increasingly being challenged across the world. The movements like Shift the Power, Proximate Philanthropy, Decolonizing Philanthropy, etc., all of which essentially point to the importance of giving power to the people who are closest to the problems and letting them advocate for themselves. But the prevailing donor-centric models sort of keep perpetuating this dynamic of the haves and have-nots, in which the haves are the ones who, effectively set the expectation of that relationship, which sort of limits the potential for systemic change. So how do you feel philanthropy can encourage power sharing and truly center the communities at the heart of all, efforts? And how do you practice that in your own work, with the communities that you support?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that what you realize, Urvi, is that over time, when you spend more time in the sector, you realize that it's really very tough to scale something unless you really involve the community, but anything grassroots, unless you really involve the community.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. One of the flagship programs we run is probably one of the largest programs in water for rural India. And it's completely a participatory model, which is driven by the community. Okay. I can tell you without doubt, if it was a top-down model, it would not work. And we realized this very early. And so the design principles are bottoms up with top-down support provided to, the community and the NGOs who are working with the community. And that was a big realization we had. And, water has been a burning issue for decades, and people have tried all kind of interventions. And this intervention actually scaled. This year we worked in 1,200 villages in 7 states. And hope, if all goes well, next year we could probably be in double the number of states in 5,000-10,000 villages. But I think you realize that if you really want to build truly participatory movements, truly scale movements, you have to basically make sure that they're participatory. I also think that's true about, institutions that we are built with, that if you really want them to be sustainable, that you have to broad base their governance. You cannot seek to control them. So every institution that we have been a part of, we've made sure that we do not dominate it in any way, and nobody dominates it actually. So Ashoka University is got a very broad-based governance structure. No single donor, irrespective of their contribution, dominates it. In fact, if you look at the governing board, members are rotating out of it. I stepped down after a very long tenure on it. And, that doesn't mean you don't support it. You continue to support it. But this broad-based principle of governance is actually very, very important, which is, collaborate, care about institutions. And that's true about other institutions that we have helped with. We don't actually sit on the boards of any institution that we have supported. And we support at this point about 50 institutions, partners. We don't sit on any of their boards, and we don't control any of their governance. These are all partner-oriented models. So I think this making sure that you have this trust in the people you work with and that they are deeply rooted in their communities is very, very important to us.
Yeah. And probably participatory processes may not be a silver bullet solution.
It may not. It doesn't always work. But just because it doesn't always work doesn't mean that you don't do it.
Exactly. But then there are probably some other practices, which funders can embrace, even if that's not possible. Yeah. For example, multi-year funds or giving.
We learned this the hard way. It's a very important point you made. 3 years ago, we actually asked all our I have this. I'm maniacal about not calling our partners NGOs. I call them partners. And 3 years ago, we went and we surveyed all of them and we asked them, tell us what's right and wrong about our engagement with you. And they came back and told us that, you tell us that we should think long term, but if you give us annual grants, how can we be long term?
Yes.
And so we actually changed to multi-year grants. We said, okay, we will sign multi-year MOUs with you. So we have now a 3-year grant cycle. And we had to change the way we work. We had to fund 3 years of expenses into our balance sheet to be able to give them the comfort that, we have the money so that you will have the money.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely important. I think it's all about investing and building trust-based relationships with the partners, as you say. And that could take various forms. Like, for example, you include their voices in your, strategy planning, you take feedback, you listen to them, you engage with them. So, because very often one is hearing from people that, lack of adequate knowledge about specific communities leads to more challenges and potentially programs which may not do as well in the long run. So, absolutely. We've been talking to people from donors down to the grassroots level, and we are realizing that supporting issues like human rights, gender equality, etc., is seen as very sort of political, and philanthropists and organizations are reluctant to tackle it head on. Even though philanthropy, and like you said, especially family philanthropy, has the potential to take risks, test new ideas, influence policy, support in building, credibility of non-profits that are doing rights-based work. But what do you feel are the apprehensions or the barriers that are stopping people from taking more risks with their philanthropic capital, and what can be done at an ecosystem level to deal with these challenges?
Yeah, no, Urvi, I don't. I think, look, people should play in areas that they are passionate about. Okay. We've actually done work in gender, inequality, and we continue to support a whole bunch of organizations in that space. We work very closely with Coro, for example, which is, I think, one of the best-in-class programs. We run a fellowship with them. And so I see no reasons why philanthropists should not venture into these areas. I can see why people would hesitate, in some cases, engaging with organizations that are activists.
Yeah.
And I think that's a question of risk appetite. It depends, if you, if you feel that risk is too much because you're vulnerable to backlashes, I think that's a personal call, and each person has to make that assessment for themselves. But by and large, I think people should work in areas that they're deeply passionate about. We've chosen our verticals, and we work with Coro mainly in the area of capacity building. But I think it's we work with Vidhi, for example, in a program for gender, and so I think people should make these choices. I don't think people should simply say that because there's risk, I won't work in this space. I think it's what an organization also says. Is it simply going to say stuff to be antagonistic, or is it going to say things because generally cares and is mature, is going to say it in a mature way, I think is also important.
Right. Thanks, Amit. Just a last question. What do you feel, will be the role of philanthropy, let's say 5 to 10 years from now? How do you see the sector evolve?
Yeah. I think we have seen the sector change a lot over the last 5-10 years. I think, first of all, the one good thing I have seen is domestic philanthropy is stepping up. 5 or 10 years, a lot of philanthropy in India was being dominated by, international flows. And that may have happened because FCRA has got tightened. But in my mind, it should have happened in any event. I mean, given the amount of wealth that exists in our country, it should be the responsibility of Indian society to try to solve India's problems, because it's not just wealth, but it's also by the process of solving our problems will bring us closer to the problems, which is very, very important. We should not forget that. So one trend that I hope to see is acceleration of that. I hope to see far greater engagement from not just wealth creators at the top, but also people who can give time at the bottom with solving of India's problems and understanding of India's issues. That is one thing. The second thing I hope to see is, continued maturity in how these problems are to be solved. I think there was a lot of check writing which was happening earlier. Check writing and board display, they would go hand in hand. I think now you're beginning to see people thinking a lot more about impact. How are they driving sustainable change? Including some people thinking about, can I exit, if I've actually maybe solved a problem and move on to something else. I think we will see a lot more of that. I think we'll see creation of platforms. I think we will also see creation of collaborators. Lot more collab. We already have examples of some collaboratives in the country, which are COVID times. We saw ACT coming together and doing a fabulous job. Ashoka is an example of a very good collaborative. The Pay What It Takes is an example. Grow Fund that we partner Edelgive with is an example of a collaborative. I think we will see a lot more collaborators. We'll also see, I think, people work much more closer with the government, but not to simply supplement the government, but to actually, do things in a manner which makes a lot more sense. So I think there will be a lot of changes. People will invest, I think, more in knowledge, research, intellectual property to actually drive change. So I think there will be a big pivot in the next 5 to 10 years after what seemed like a long period where people were doing things in a very, incremental way.
Thank you so much, Amit. It has really been inspirational to listen to your ideas and all the advice that you've shared today. I think I'm particularly struck by your honesty, commitment, and the sense of urgency in acknowledging the critical need to adopt more bold and problem-solving approaches to philanthropy. We'll be back with more episodes on how philanthropy can consciously approach giving in a way that enables social justice and dignity for those who are most marginalized. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
All
you.
the best to everyone. Thank you.